happen. Okay.
Didn't happen. All right. Here we are with Eileen Cook, the prolific author and mentor and speaker extraordinaire, one of the three horsemen of the, or excuse me, three beautiful women of the Creative Writers Academy and the Federation of BC Writers judge for their short story contest coming up, BC Shorts, or it's called something else now. It'll be in the newsletter. Yeah, so I just had a few questions. The first one being, what came first? Was it speaker, author, or mentor?
So I was actually a bit of a speaker and mentor beforehand. So before writing, my day job was as a counselor. And I was actually, believe it or not, somebody put me in charge. So I was the senior therapist and clinic director. So I had a group of people that I worked with, and I taught courses in psychology and in rehabilitation at the university level, and really quite enjoyed it. But of course, my passion was really writing. So that's what I was continually, trying to do and trying to make a career in that particular area. Starting about 1 million projects and never finishing them, and then writing a bunch of projects that never went anywhere. Lots of rejection in there, but eventually started to sell my writing and started to publish. And once that happened for me, it was kind of a natural thing to sort of want to continue talking. I guess, as you can tell, if I get a microphone, I'm like, and another thing. So I need to continue talking. So I think the speaking just sort of continued out of that. And I just love working with other people. So I teach for Simon Fraser University as well, and just enjoy working with other writers. I think there's nothing more fun than sort of talking about story and what's working and what's not working and what might help. And so it kind of evolved into that.
That's fantastic. Do you find, you mentioned that you had a bunch of short, starts that you didn't quite finish. Are any of those in the works to be revisited, any of those old projects, or do you kind of just let stuff go?
It's a little bit of both. A lot of people ask me, I finished 4 complete novels that I shopped around and tried to find agents for and tried to get published before I sold. And people often say, oh, do you think you'll, resurrect those novels now and rewrite them? And I kind of compare it to, I don't know if you've ever done any drawing, but like if you draw a picture and it's not quite right, so you erase it and then you try and draw it again, it's still not quite right, so you erase it again. And then you draw and you erase, and you draw and you erase, and eventually the paper's kind of grimy and it has a hole in it.
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
Those are my early novels. Oh boy. So I don't know if I would ever rewrite them. Like, I kind of love them for what they are. They're massively flawed, and they have issues and holes in their plots and all kinds of things, and a little bit misshapen, kind of Picasso-like with their eye placement and things. But they were the very best that I could do at that time, and I learned a lot with each one. Wow. Having said that, I have stolen characters and lines. Sometimes I remember one of my very first novels, I had a line that I absolutely loved. And so I used it again in a later book because
because you can.
Because you can. That's the best part of being a writer is, and I always say to people, save everything. And just because I didn't rework mine doesn't mean somebody else won't. I know many people where, the first book that they publish is the first book that they wrote. Now, they went through many, revisions and, starting over and all those kinds of things. But that was the book that they just wanted to find a way to work. So I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. It's just what works for you.
Yeah. Huh. So what led you to the Creative Academy? Can you tell us a little bit about that and about the relationship that you have with the other ladies?
Sure. So I've known Crystal and Donna in different formats. So I actually edited a manuscript of Donna's early on. That's how I met her. She hired me to freelance edit one of her manuscripts. And Crystal, I had met through the Surrey International Writers Conference.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Which
is fantasy for me to attend.
It's spectacular. And that conference just has the group there has done such an amazing job of creating like this warm, welcoming community. And you go and you feel charged up that you're there and all energized, and there's these great workshops, and you leave feeling like, I'm gonna write all the things. But of course it only lasts Thursday through Sunday in October. And so Crystal and Donna had gotten together and had started the idea of wanting to start an online writing community that would sort of harness that same feeling of support. I mean, I've had the fortune to go to a lot of different writing conferences and events throughout the US and in Canada. And I dislike every so often you'll end up at one where it feels like it's a competition, where you'll sort of see people like wanting to elbow someone out of the way at a thing. And there's room on the shelf for everyone's books, for everyone's story has a value. And what makes you great as a writer might be a weakness of mine. I can learn from you, you can learn from me. There isn't, or there shouldn't be, a hierarchy. And we wanted to create that. We wanted to find a place that we could do that. So we decided to start this online community. And it's been up and running for a couple of years. And we feel like we finally worked out the kinks and we have our groove. So we've got different communities for different genres. We have lots of live events and things happening. And so far, it's just been fantastic.
I really enjoyed the Zoom chats. It's what a wonderful experience to go in. And I didn't think I would at first, you know, the accountability group with Jenny in the morning. Yeah, it's very new for me, but I found, you know what, you just are looking at a screen and there's all these people, and then you look up and you're like, oh, I'll go do this thing. And then you look and you see like 10 people that have their head down working. You're like, oh, I better not, you know, and then you get those words in. It's amazing. I love the way it's structured too. There's master classes, there's something for every level, which is, I was very, very impressed.
Well, and I was totally shocked when we started the morning writing sprints. And I will freely admit, I want to think it was Donna's idea. And I was like, who is going to show up in the morning just to type silently with other people?
Right.
You know, but if they aren't one of our most popular things, and I think it is some ways like, and I've done this before where you go to a coffee shop and you meet some writer friends and it's like, okay, we're all going to go and meet and work on our manuscript, and or you'll do that at the library. So just doing it online means you don't have to wear pants. And
pretty much.
You'll see people like, I laugh, like, you know, in bathrobes and with bed heads and every different things. But there's something about kind of getting in there and getting the words in. But if that time doesn't work for people, yeah, we have a lot of things that are recorded that you can do at your own time, whatever works for you. So hopefully there's a little something for everybody.
Yeah, I haven't really seen anyone that said, you know, well, it's too bad you don't have this. It's kind of like, what? And you have this? Oh my God. That's so awesome. Yeah. So can you tell me now a little bit, when you're looking at short stories versus novels, let's skip to the short story contest coming up here. I will put the dates and how to apply for that, by the way, in the comment or the section there, that little section for those people that will be watching this video. It'll be in the YouTube comments thing, whatever that's called. You tell them with this. So when you're looking at judging a short story versus a novel, what are you expecting from people? Like, what do you expect in terms of polish or other things?
I try to kind of go to every short story with a very open, because I think one of the great things about the short story form is it can take so many different ways. And so I would never want to say, oh, it should be like set up this way, because then someone will write something that breaks all of those rules and just blows me out of the water. What I can say is that a short story is a taste. Like, you don't have the breadth or the time to get into everything. You're giving us a moment. And so you sometimes have to sort of condense. You can't have an epic multi-universe fantasy span. You can't have Game of Thrones as a short story. It's just not gonna work. It's just gonna be convoluted and messy. What I do expect is a clean manuscript. And by that, I'm looking for something that understands the basic mechanics, has good grammar, is set up well, is easy to read. And then on top of that, I'm looking for something, if I was to quote one person, Carol Monahan, if people know her, she always talks about sparkle. There's just something that makes a manuscript feel alive, and that can overshadow a lot of things. When I talk with students, I sort of feel like most of writing can be taught. You can get better at point of view or descriptions and all of those things. But being a storyteller is kind of one of those innate abilities. So I'm I'm wanting you to pull me into that world, and no pressure or anything, but even more now that the outside world is kind of a hot mess. I'm so looking forward to these stories as a chance for me to get out of my living room. I live alone in an 800 square foot condo that I have been in now for a month. So please take me away.
Send those words in, people. Oh my
Yeah, like I wanna have those experiences. I want to connect with other people, whether they're real people or you know, talking dogs or aliens, or I mean, I'm open to any of those things, but give me a story.
If you hear any banging upstairs, my husband is distracting my children right now, and he does that by them jumping or on him, I don't know. I have no idea what's going on up there, but if you hear anything, it's just they're just having a good time apparently.
My dogs to erupt in barking, so I'm just keeping one eye on them and one eye on you. So
that's all right. That's okay. Yeah. So how do you feel that there's been a change kind of in your motivations since you've started the isolation, the self-quarantining or self-isolation, in terms of your writing or goals?
I think the interesting thing is, you know, there's a meme going somewhere around Facebook about a writer before the quarantine, a writer during the quarantine, a writer after, and it's the same. It's just somebody hunched over a desk. So in some ways, I feel uniquely prepared for a quarantine that I've been, you know, my whole life. I'm a working writer now. This is what I do. So between writing and teaching. So I've lived alone for a while. So, you know, being at home and playing with my imaginary friends is a very comfortable place for me to be. The only thing I do find is that it is distracting. And I think there's this pressure that, oh, the quarantine is on, so you should be learning French and, you know, taking up yoga and alphabetizing your spices and writing a novel. And I think that's sometimes asking a lot. But if you can carve out time, and I do respect for a lot of people who are doing it with kids in the house, that may not be as easy as when you can just ship them out to school. But if you can carve out the time, for me, I think it's about trying to set a routine. So I'm trying to stick as close as I can to my routine.
All right. Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking too. It's interesting. I heard, I was watching the documentary Love Between the Covers. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Are you familiar with that documentary?
I've heard it. I haven't seen it. But
it was on Netflix for a while, and then it was on spinning around. I'm going to spin all around the circle. Hello. I think it's on Amazon Prime now, but it's a documentary about romance writers and romance authors and romance authors and romance readers. And it's amazing. I mean, it has Beverly Jenkins in it. You can't ask for anything.
Yeah, can't go wrong.
She's amazing, right? And but Radcliffe is in it, who is a woman who writes lesbian fiction, and she's one of the biggest publishers of the LGBTQ plus work in the States. And she is a plastic surgeon. And so she would go to work for the day and then come home and write. And so she said, well, you know, if you want to write, yeah, make time to write. And so, oh, you're right. So at that time, you're right. Oh, sorry. I had my first kid, and it was the same. I was like, okay, so what time do I have? You know, and just really, if that's what I want to do, then you have to make it happen. And sometimes it is. It's like this urge to be productive right now, you know, like this urge to produce and to be valid and needed in our economy right now. But really, is the time for your preventative mental health is kind of part of it. And so if writing you can transition into writing being your kind of preventative mental health time, then that for me has been a big help. Like just that interior mind shift of, wait, this might kind of feel like work, but it's also my me time. So it's really not that way. And now I get up early, and that's what I did, because then I can get up and listen to the robins and drink my coffee and all that kind of stuff before chaos.
Your time with your imaginary friends is helpful, and it's needed. And you know, I think there's a lot people can do to trick themselves, whether it's writing at the same time every day. For some people, it's really helpful. I know some people start a music playlist, so your brain starts to be like, oh, that music's playing, that means it's time to write. Yeah. I know one person who does this. She picks a scented candle for every book. Oh, wow. So like she's doing something outdoors, and so she had one that was like, you know, pine trees and wood, and she only burns it when she's writing. And she thinks for her, she feels like there's this connection that her brain, the sensory lobe is like, oh, and that means it's a creative time. So whatever it is, whatever trick works for you. And I think that's one of the things I love about writers is, boy, we're a weird lot, right? Like there are people who have like, you know, my altar with my magic rocks, and someone else has, you know, a certain scented candle that has to be burning. And, you know, other people are like, no, I can only write, you know, under the sun. And like whatever it is, I don't care, and try out different things if you're not sure what's going to work for you. But to get into some kind of habit, that's, I think, the biggest key.
I really like that idea of a scented candle, you know, or some kind of trigger like that. Like I know I get up and I have my coffee, I make it a certain way, certain temperature, it's got to be hot, you know, and then you can sit down and write. And if I don't have that, it's like, forget it, man, it's not going to happen. So I totally, that makes sense to me, having that one little trigger. Probably, you never know, like in your brain, maybe
there is
different connections.
Yeah. Here I go up on my psychology kick.
Yes,
but there's something that we know that are called habit strings that our brain sort of connects. So if you've ever had the experience of you show up at work and you suddenly realize that you have no memory of kind of like brushing your teeth, like, but you just did all these things. Like I get up, I brush my teeth, I take my shower, I grab my granola bar, I do this, I get in the car, this radio station's on, and then you drive to work. And you may like not even remember those particular events, but in your brain, there's a habit string that's kind of linked up. So what you're trying to do is create a habit string with your writing.
Okay, yeah.
So where it's like, oh, this is a thing that I do. I had one friend who had small kids, and she wrote for 15 minutes a day in the bathroom.
Oh,
because she was
nightmare. Like, fortunately, my kids they're pretty independent, my goodness, but still, even so, it's like some mornings, it just depends on how the night goes, how my morning goes, right? So it's like, yeah, oh boy. Yeah, I think it's definitely when you have a passion, that's just it, right? That's the thing. And I think it's weird because I always wonder, you know, I'm an artist by trade. I went to school for fine arts, and I always say, oh, I'm an artist. And people are like, oh, that's so wonderful. And I'm like, yeah. And then I'm like, and I'm a writer. I'm writing a, you know, a fantasy novel. And then people are like, really? Like, I don't understand, because people love reading books and they love reading these crazy out there, you know, Game of Thrones, Outlander, like watching those shows. But then if you say, oh, I'm a writer and I write romance novels, they're like, oh, okay, like it's like they didn't occur to some people, it just doesn't occur to them that someone sat down and invented this whole entire world in these characters. Like for them, it's already fully formed when they get it. So
people are either, I find, really impressed that you're a writer, or they're kind of like, that's not a real thing, right? Like it's sort of like if you're like, I'm a princess, right? Like, you're not.
No way.
So it kind of comes down to one or the other, but it's, I mean, I wouldn't do anything else. This is my favorite thing to do.
That's fantastic.
Though some days I might take that back.
I just had a couple more questions. Some of my members, since I'm the rep for the North here, they're just coming to the Fed, and they actually don't have any plan to write. They just have an idea, and they don't actually even know how to write. Now, I always just say, okay, well, let's, you know, work through these characters, do character development, environment development. But do you have any other tips to help with somebody who is just feeling that bug to put these ideas into formation?
I think the nice thing about writing is there's as many ways to go about it as there are people. So some people will find that they want to spend a lot of time kind of planning what the story looks like. You can write things on index cards or on Post-it notes and put them up on the wall, and like, oh, this scene could happen and that scene could happen, and rearrange them in different orders. I often will start by doing just some character work, because of course I'm really interested in people, being a counselor. So I'll spend time kind of interviewing my imaginary friends. And I actually use the old counseling interview that I used to have. And it's actually on the Creative Academy website, so you can download it. It's free if you want it. Where I'm just kind of asking.
The link will be in the thingy.
Yeah, in the thingy. Go to the thingy. And I'm interviewing my characters, and I'm wanting to know more about them and understand them and what makes them do what they do. I'm a big believer is it doesn't matter what's happened to your characters. It's the story they tell themselves about what's happened to them. So what do they see as important to them?
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a really wonderful insight for any level of writer to just remember that too, right? And yeah, cool.
And then for other people, the best way, all that planning will do is just frustrate the snot out of them, and they'll feel stuck. And in those cases, just sit down and start writing. I really don't believe that words are wasted. Sometimes you end up rearranging it. I mean, it's the same amount of work. People are always, there's the great debate between plotters and pantsters. So people who just write by the seat of their pants, right? And the truth of the matter is there's not a right way. Like, I know New York Times bestsellers on both sides. So people who plot out their books very carefully before writing chapter one, and people who sit down and are like, chapter one, there was a woman. She was an elf, right? Like they don't know, and everything in between. So people who sometimes have some ideas but aren't clearly really where they want to be, you still get there. It's just going to be where you end up doing the work. So some people are doing it ahead of time and doing a lot of plotting ahead of time. Some people are doing it after with a lot of revisions once they have this mess out. And some people are doing it somewhere in the middle.
Hey.
You don't save yourself any of the work. It's just when you do it.
Totally. Oh. My final question I had, I don't know if there's a lot of talk going on. I've seen a few posts on the forums about how do you think the pandemic is going to affect the book market? Like, do you think there's going to be a change in what people are interested in reading and what publishers are interested in looking for?
You know, I find it fascinating, and I don't know. And I think everybody's a little bit unclear about what exactly is it going to look like.
Right.
I did see an interview with someone, and I would give them credit if I could remember who it was, but someone was talking about, you know, we maybe can look back at past history. So there was a pandemic, obviously, with the Spanish flu in 1918.
Yeah.
And of course, what you saw right after that was kind of the wild roaring 20s. So I'm wondering if what we might see is a wanting to get away from heavy, serious stuff and to just party like it's 1919 all over again, right? Like just kind of bust out. So I don't know if you'll see like a desire for like more comedy and adventure and escapism. That's my best guess.
Okay.
I think there will be a desire to maybe not have the heavy because I think we've been in it. That's my guess. I think publishing is still trying to figure out how we're going to deal with it. If you write obviously fantasy or historical, you're golden.
Yeah.
If you write contemporary, the real question is, how does that play out in your book? And it's going to, because there will never be obviously a time where people aren't talking about how that happened,
Right.
and how it impacted the character.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I know it's interesting. I was thinking maybe something a little bit more formulaic might be soothing. I know, like if you think about when Westerns and stuff were really popular after World War II and all that sort of stuff, something extremely predictable where there's a clear hero or heroine and then it goes like the hero's journey or something like that. It's kind of like, yeah, I saw a few different posts about different theories and stuff, but nothing. So it's interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I think in general, you see the public in general, most of us are reading for entertainment. So there are certainly people reading for loftier goals and rock on with your bad self if that's you. But for most people, they're reading a chapter or two before they go to bed, or they're, you know, that kind of thing. So they're looking for something that makes them feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just going to get stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, those were all my questions that I had. Is there anything else that you would want anybody to know that's considering joining the Creative Academy? Like anything that you wanted to add?
The more the merrier. It's free. So we'd love to have you. We'd love to have different people. And what I would tell people is that writing's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be at different points at different times. And, you know, I spent forever wishing like, oh, I just want to be published. If I could just be published, then I would feel like I had arrived. And of course, as soon as I published, it was like, well, now I need to multi-publish.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to have foreign sales. Oh, I need to hit a list. Oh, I need to, like, there's always something that you're wanting and reaching for.
Mm-hmm.
And the good and bad news about writing is that you can always get better. It's never ending, like we're never going to get there. It's just going to keep going. And I think it's great to reach out, find a community, whether that's the BC Federation, whether that's the Creative Academy, whether that's both, whether that's your local writing group or a critique partner, and get somebody along for the ride, because it's a long trip.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for speaking with me. It was wonderful to spend this time together.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And congratulations, you got your Zoom down. You're like Rocking your high tech now.
I'm hoping it'll be a bit smoother the next times, and I'll know what that thingy's called. I know there's a name for it. It's not the comment section because that's where people comment, but it's like, you know, the information section. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out. Okay.
Okay, well, you take care.
All right. Take care. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.